From wherever you're watching in Australia, New Zealand, or around the world,
I'm Ben Blaschke.
I'm Ricky Kroesen.
And I'm Landon Blackhall, and it's time to run it out. Well, folks, there certainly has been a lot of news coming out of the poker world as of late, but here in Australia and indeed around the world, we've lost two of the game's greats. Here in Australia on Sunday, Mother's Day, we sadly heard the news that Peter Aristidou from Melbourne has passed away. He was one of the regulars in the Crown poker scene, and indeed a friend to so many. And, Peter was always quick with a laugh or a joke or a story, or even just to share tips and advice. Ricky, I know that he was a player that you knew very well and someone that was quite close to your heart.
Yeah. Every time I'd go to Melbourne, I'd always have a chat with Peter, and we'd end up on the same table a lot. And actually, the first time I went to Melbourne with Paul Gibson, he was showing me the ropes, and we walk into the Crown poker room, and Paul was like, "Oh, that's Peter Aristidou," and I was like, "Who?" And he's like, "That little Italian guy." I was like, "Oh yeah," and he's like a little master. He's really good. So we walked over and we watched him play for a little bit before we had dinner the first night. And then on their dinner break, Paul knew Peter and he introduced me. And after that, we were friends. And such a nice-hearted guy. And he would always find time to have a chat. And also it was great to play him on the table because even though he's so kind, he was still really competitive. And I love seeing that come out in people who are really, really friendly, and you see him get that competitive spirit on the table. So, yeah, it's a really, really sad news to hear a couple of days ago.
Ben, did you have any memories or thoughts on Peter?
Yeah, look, I mean, Landon, yourself and I obviously go right back in the poker reporting scene, back, 15, 17, 18 years. And Peter was sort of always around, particularly in those early days. I remember whether it be in Melbourne or in Sydney or wherever we're reporting, Peter would be there. And as Ricky says, I mean, he was always smiling, happy, talking to people, having a good time, helping people. I mean, a lot of the stories have come out the past few days about Peter have been how, he took people under his wing, supported them, gave them some advice. I mean, I know there's a handful of people who, Peter was very close to, Amanda de Cesare, people like that. We really helped come into the scene around that time. And I think that seems to be the common thread. What everybody says about Peter is he was such a friendly face, always willing for to have a chat, always willing to help, and always willing to have a laugh, really.
The most recent news breaking, in fact, the day after we learned of Peter's passing, we have lost truly one of the poker world's greatest icons. In fact, there's probably no word in any language that really describes the magnitude of the loss of Doyle Brunson. Ricky, I know that you've met Doyle in the past. What are your memories of him?
So Doyle's really shaped the beginnings of my game. So when I first started playing recreationally, I went bringing up Paul Gibson's name again. I went over his house and we watched the World Series of Poker. I didn't know it even existed. And he's like pointing everyone out, and he's like, "Oh, that's Doyle Brunson." I'm like, "Who's he?" And he's like, "Oh, he's won the World Series twice. He's a legend." And then I found out he'd released a book, Super System. And so I bought that book, and that was my first piece of study to kind of learn more about the game. And actually, that was the book I studied for a year and then left my job and started playing full time. But Doyle seemed always very kind and had time for anyone. And in the same sense, it was good to see him he gets competitive as well. And there's so many different stories. Like one of the stories I heard was some guy shot someone, and Doyle just walked straight up to him and he's like, "Well, you can't shoot everyone," because Doyle didn't want to get shot. So he confronts him and the guy goes, "Well, I can try." And Doyle goes, "Well, you're not shooting me," and just walks off. And he just had no fear. And these stories obviously are going to come out in that Netflix documentary they're making about him. And so, I'm guessing World Series will probably make a memorial tournament for him. And I'm guessing, I don't know if Aussie Millions will come back, but we'll push to get a memorial tournament for Peter as well.
I definitely believe there's going to be a lot of memorial events being held in Texas Dolly's honor. I mean, there's so much to celebrate. Ben, as we know, a 10-time World Series of Bracelet winner, including the 2 main event wins in 1976 and 1977, author of Super System 2, also inducted into the Poker Hall of Fame, along with his son, Todd, many years later. Clearly, Doyle Brunson will be missed by many, and he left such a lasting legacy on the game.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he was different. He was different to everybody else. I mean, if we look at all the people that we look up to and follow in the poker industry today, they've come through the modern poker boom and the modern era. Texas Dolly came through playing in the underground card games in Texas. That's a scene that most of us will never even know anything about. As Ricky says, some of the stories he's got from playing in those illegal games, those underground games, are absolutely remarkable. Then he was one of the 7 players invited by Jack Binion to take part in the original WSOP in 1970. The 10-2, he's got, how many people have a hand named after them? The famous Doyle Brunson hand. As you say, inducted into the Poker Hall of Fame. He's one of only 4 people with 10 WSOP bracelets at the moment. The list goes on, and I think at the end of the day, I think for people of our age, and I think we all tuned on in to watch WPT late at night in our early 20s, and Doyle played a big part of that. He was always on the screen, and one of those guys that we looked up to and admired. So unfortunately, I never had the privilege of actually meeting him, but certainly he was an icon of the industry, and will never be forgotten. That's for sure.
Doyle will certainly be remembered long after, indeed, we are gone, and I'm sure there'll be more on this in the coming days and weeks. But indeed, from all of us in the Australian poker community, our thoughts are with Doyle's family at this time. Now to one of the other big stories that's broken over the last couple of weeks, and this one of fairly major controversy, with a man winning the ladies event at the most recent WPT Seminole series in Florida. Now, the case of men playing in ladies events is not anything new. There was, of course, the controversy. Correct me if I'm wrong, this was the 2011 WSOP ladies event where Sean Deeb, amongst others, protested by playing in these ladies events. But to see this man win this event obviously raised more than a few eyebrows. Ben, I know that you have some pretty strong thoughts on this one.
I'm frustrated by men that insist on entering women's tournaments because they always tend to claim it's about, equality of opportunity or whatever. Well, the reality is that poker is a male-dominated sport, has been for a long time. Although women's participation is increasing, which is great, it still is very much a male-dominated sport. And one of the reasons is that a lot of women are quite intimidated coming into the game. So one of the best ways to sort of help that happen, and I should say that the more people that come into the game is good for the game in general. So encourage more women to come into the sport. These women's events are a great idea because they remove that intimidation factor that women can feel, rightly or wrongly, from having, men who, we're like sometimes, we're blustery and aggressive. So it's just a comfortable space for women to get a bit of a feel for the game. So when men come in and play these events, I find it a little bit egotistical. I find it completely unnecessary, and I find it harmful to the game. So yeah, I find it quite disappointing when I see these stories emerge.
100%. Yeah, I think that we've got to grow women in poker. I love it when I see women win any events, main events, and having ladies events gives them the comfort. So, the ladies that are sitting at home that, don't really feel comfortable, like Ben said, sitting at a table, generally the rest of the table will be men. They know they can go sit down, have some fun, play some poker at a table of ladies. And I just think there should be a global rule that it's called ladies event, so it's for ladies only. A 30-year-old is not allowed to play the Super Seniors event at World Series because they're in the wrong category. So I don't think there should be any men in the females events. Even I think, I'm not sure, there was a rule at World Series where you had to pay double the buy-in or 10-1 on the buy-in or something. We've created it for a reason, and we want to promote poker to ladies all around the world. And I think in the States they're doing a great job, and we're slowly getting there here in Australia. There is a ladies event popping up at most of the series now. And then at the WPT Australia coming up, we've got the 660 Australian Championship, Women's Championship. So that's going to be an awesome event. I'm not sure on the rules for WPT Australia and the Star Casino Gold Coast, but I hope that it's strictly women only.
My understanding of what transpired in Florida is actually not dissimilar to the anti-discrimination laws that they have here in Australia. Now, technically speaking, there are actually no restrictions able to be imposed upon exclusive events per se. I certainly don't want to seem like we are speaking out of turn when it comes to this issue. I mean, I'm very keen to hear a female perspective on this, but looking at it objectively from an industry point of view, I think that the culture of ladies events here in Australia in comparison to the US is quite different. On the one hand, and having witnessed this firsthand at the WPT World Championship and speaking to many of the amazing women who have been part of the women's poker organizations leading the charge in developing the game for women, by women, what we do see is a much more supportive, much more all shoulders to the wheel approach to this. You know, all these groups like the League of Nations and the Women's Poker Association are all really working cohesively and working together to really grow and develop the game for women. Whereas on the other hand, we're not really seeing so much of that cohesiveness here in Australia. Now, there are certainly exceptions to that rule. We are seeing, for example, 𝘌𝘗𝘐𝘌 with the development of her women's poker products in partnership with the APL. But it's interesting because, again, looking at it objectively from an industry point of view, we already see one brand already well established, and it's led by, of course, Jackie Glazier, the Jackstar super high roller with the APL. It's already a well-established brand, and it offers a much higher buy-in in comparison to the J-Dub product. So we are seeing more female participation, and in particular in the Jackstar, because we've already got that established, I guess you could say, female brand. So I don't know, Ben, Ricky, what are your thoughts on this?
Just we were talking off air before we started recording, and Ricky mentioned that that the ladies event at the WSOP is becoming a bit of a behemoth in its own right these days. It's really taking off as quite a prestigious event, which is great to see. And Ricky, also, you made a great suggestion earlier when we're looking ahead to WPT Australia up at the Star Gold Coast in September. There is that 660 ladies event, but I think it was suggested that perhaps that could be the winner could qualify for the ladies event at the WPT Championship in Las Vegas at 𝘌 in December.
Yeah, we could talk to Danny, and I'm sure he would be happy to throw in a few nights accommodation at the 𝘌, or they could just make a package out, take it out of the prize pool. First gets money, the trophy, and maybe like a 4K package, accommodation, some cash, and a buy-in. So that would be great. And then you'd have one female from Australia flying over there, coming back in December and telling all her friends, oh my God, amazing poker room. I went to Vegas. There was like 1,000, 1,500 ladies in this event. The atmosphere was great. And then she tells her friend, and small things like that will just promote awareness and attract more women to the game. So I think that's a great idea.
Couldn't agree more. But again, we certainly don't want to assert ourselves as the authority on this particular subject. We would love to be able to hear more female perspectives on this. If you've got something you'd like to add to the conversation, please drop a comment below on our YouTube channel or on our Facebook page. We'd love to hear from you. Now, boys, we did touch on the subject of WPT Australia and all the great things that they're doing, but of course, as we've seen, there have been a number of challenges for the industry over these last few years, and in particular for the casinos with all the restrictions that have been put in place, not just as a result of COVID, but all the drama surrounding the Royal Commissions and the public inquiries into the casino's conduct. Now, Ben, I know that there's some news on that front, particularly from Star Poker in Sydney. Is that right?
Yeah, Landon. I mean, look, we could talk on this topic for a long time. I mean, I should start by, everybody's well aware of this, but, Melbourne and Sydney are facing the same challenges at the moment with the new regulations in place around the amount of time anybody can be on a casino floor in a day and in a week, particularly over the course of a week, makes it very challenging to run, a significant tournament series that run over multiple days or multiple weeks in these locations. So that's certainly a tough thing for the Melbourne and the Sydney poker communities to have to face. There have been a few more changes though recently. I noticed that Star Poker has dropped its Royal Flush jackpot that it used to have. Now, I guess there's different reasons around that. Perhaps jackpot liability might be something that Star's not too keen on, given that their earnings are down at the moment. I mean, they recently have come out and slashed their workforce by 500 people. There are some regulatory challenges they're facing around that. That's another discussion altogether. And I do feel for Star in that sense. But I'm keen to get your take on this, Ricky. I mean, the two big changes for Star Poker, certainly in Sydney, is removing that Royal Flush jackpot, and the rake has gone up as well in cash games. I mean, that's never a good thing for players. What are your thoughts?
The biggest hurdle that players talk about for casino poker is the rake. And I guess that's why home games are so popular, because especially players coming through the ranks who might just be playing 1-3, the rake is very high for that game. And so if a player's on a sort of a normal rate from overseas, if the player's playing 1-3, their hourly might be around maybe $20, $25. But when Star increased the rake years ago, I think their hourly dropped down. I think it was something small like $8 or $10. That's for like a winning player. So they talk a lot about that. In regards to the jackpot, I think it creates more action because you've got players coming into the pot with, say, a Queen 10 suited or a King 10 suited to hit the jackpot, whereas they normally wouldn't come into that pot to a large 3-bet. So in that sense, it would create more action, creating more rake. And I feel like it's a drawing point. Like they were talking about putting it up here in the Star in Brisbane, but now it's just been dropped altogether. But the Royal Flush jackpot isn't so much of an issue. It's more of the rake. And I think that if they listen to the players just a little bit more and drop the rake a little bit, the room would definitely fill, or just give the players some kind of rewards. I suggested to them to try and bring in maybe a reward system with their tier cards, and maybe they could just earn some kind of food vouchers or tier points or casino dollars, and just so the players get something back. It's a struggle because obviously poker tables make less money per square meter, and if the casino is losing money, poker will be the first thing to go and pokies will be put in their place. So I understand it from their point of view as well. They've got a business to run. But if I look at the Star Gold Coast especially, and Sydney, I guess, but more Gold Coast, and how they've come from nothing to, say, 5 years ago to now having heaps of tables and having massive series 3 or 4 times a year with 30, 40 tables, I'm not really complaining about the growth of poker in the Gold Coast here. So, yeah, it's all right. We just got to keep being open with each other and having honest conversations, and then hopefully both parties can find a nice medium. So
yeah, I think that the rake discussion is always an interesting one, and I haven't spoken to Star about exactly why this decision was made, but I have to imagine it's related to the fact that, you know, group wide the earnings are down because of what's going on, and perhaps this is one of the areas where they're trying just to boost some earnings. The danger of that is that poker players are pretty smart creatures. They're mathematical creatures by nature, and they're going to notice when you the rake up, and they're going to understand exactly what that means. Yeah, so I think that's a bit of a concern. But as you say, Ricky, I mean, we talk to Martin at the Star regularly, and I think they're generally pretty responsive and understanding, and it's good to see, you know, the poker room up on the Gold Coast recently listened to some suggestions by players and made some alterations to a few tournament structures as well around that. So, you know, I'd like to see that happen again here, hopefully.
Yeah, Martin's definitely been really, really good. For when I found out he was coming back from New Zealand, I was just so happy. And then he's just got everything going. And I'm always open and honest with him. And I'll just say, I don't like this, or I like this. Or, you know, I said to him 6 months ago, you should increase the Saturday tournament to 250 buy-in. You've got the market here. And now the last 3 weeks, he's increased it to a 400, which is a really good medium for the smaller and the higher players. And it started off really well. So, yeah, feedback, getting back to Martin he's been really good to chat with and try and work things out. That's a good medium for both players and the casino.
But we also should mention that there obviously has been some significant changes and increases to the price points for the upcoming WPT Australia series. I wanted to touch on that. We did receive notification well in advance at the WPT Prime Gold Coast series that The WPT Australia main event is now going up to an $8,000 buy-in, but we have seen price increases across the board. I think most notably, the Shane Warne one-dayer event has gone from $550 up to $880. Do you feel that this is the Star Gold Coast and WPT now trying to position themselves, or position this event rather, as the placement, as it were, for the Aussie Millions?
Yeah, so when I saw the schedule, I messaged Martin and Danny Madonna, and I said, what are you guys doing? I feel like you're outpricing the locals. You know, your smallest event is pretty big now. And so, yeah, they both explained to me that I'm guessing that the main event will become a 10K in the next few years, and this series will replicate Aussie Millions. So most of the buy-ins will be pretty big. But then Martin did say to me that they're going to run an extensive satellite series for the months leading up to the actual series. So all the locals have plenty of chances to satellite in to all of the events, and also during the series they'll run satellites as well. And let's not forget, they're still going to run Prime and a couple of other series, maybe Gold Coast Champs, which are at the smaller to medium price point. So this will be the big series, and yeah, I'm guessing this will be the new replication of Aussie Millions. Would love Aussie Millions to come back, but everything I hear about it doesn't sound good.
Well, what I will say is that there are a couple of points here. First of all, we'll go back to the heyday of the Aussie Millions, which used to draw the best of the best from around the world, being a high-profile 10K buy-in main event. I think one thing that we should look at now, if the Aussie Millions was to come back, is that now we're probably not going to get the same level of international participation that we once had. If anything, it could because of its prestige, but really 10K buy-in events are a dime a dozen these days. So back then there were like 2 or 3 around the world, and now there's multiple every week. So that's one thing to say. Will the Aussie Millions come back? There's no reason it can't. I'm sure that Crown would love to resurrect that brand once they're past their current regulatory issue. They're a little distracted at the moment by trying not to lose their license. So I think that's the first step for them, is just get this license issue sorted, then start to look at, growing their business, building their business, what to do with various brands. But they still need to get past this challenge of the time limits placed on players for how long they can spend on a casino floor. Now, what is it? I think it's 12 hours a day and 36 hours per week. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's somewhere in that vicinity. An event the size of the Aussie Millions, that makes it very, very difficult to run that series and successfully anyway. So I think that if the Aussie Millions is to come back, that issue needs to be addressed. Hopefully, over time, Crown will engage with the regulator and start to perhaps come to a more common sense approach around poker at least. And if that problem is resolved, then I think there is a pathway for the Aussie Millions to come back. And I would assume that if there's a pathway for it to come back, that eventually Crown would bring that back. But next 5 years, probably not.
I think one of the other pathways in helping to get more people back into the Australian poker market, in particular for the Aussie Millions, would have to be re-establishing legal, regulated online poker in this country. Now, we know that there has been a push to try and lobby for regulated online poker in the past, but we came so close to having something ready to go in terms of tabling legislation in Parliament right before the COVID pandemic. But it's been pretty quiet as of late. As a poker community, Ricky, what should we be doing in order to try and get online poker, regulated online poker, back into this country?
It's funny. I was thinking about this actual subject on my run this morning, and I actually don't know where it's at. I know we had the Australian, was it Online Poker Alliance?
Yes.
Which Joey Dell was leading. I don't think he's leading that anymore. I don't know what's going on, but I guess we need to create maybe a new team, find out we need someone legal, find out the avenues we need to go through, and obviously start implementing some things. I'm sure if we need to pay for a solicitor or something to get the ball rolling, there'd be plenty of people willing to donate. There's still many players in Australia obviously still playing online, and there's a huge market for it, and the US have done it. They've put it through court, and I'm not saying we have to go through court, but I'm sure we could get a bill passed if we go through the right avenues. And then we can have poker advertised on billboards. We can have TV ads like we used to. We can have legally have online ambassadors, and that would definitely have another mini boom of poker in Australia, because the people who aren't game to go to the casino can log on to their computers like they used to, or new players, and play in the comfort of their own home and work out the game and be more comfortable, and that will help grow the game as well. So yeah, I don't know where it's at, to be honest. I really don't.
The concern at the moment is that with the regulatory landscape again around gambling in general in Australia at the moment, everything is anti-gambling, anti-casino, anti-poker machines, anti-everything, that perhaps the political will might not be there to even touch this subject just at the moment, at least until things again die down a little bit. Now, we all come from the same perspective, which is the logical thing to do is to legalise and regulate online poker. We know that not having it legalised and regulated doesn't mean it's not happening. Of course it is. The Australian poker community is playing extensively online. But if the Australian government is serious about protecting and looking after their own players, then they shouldn't be banning it. They should be regulating it. That's the way to do it. So that's the logical argument we can make. But even then, now, as I said, at the moment, I'm not sure the political will exists right now to touch anything gambling.
Finally, gents, we've been talking about the changes that have been happening throughout the Australian poker landscape. And of course, one of the other big stories that came about recently was the acquisition of one Tom Bauer Esquire, the founder of LCA Poker, is now coming on board as the business manager for the APL Poker Tour. This is in line with a number of structural changes after the Australian Poker League and the Full House Group was acquired by Entain, the company behind Ladbrokes. Ben, I know that you're across almost everything when it comes to casinos and gaming, not just here in Australia, but the entire Asia Pacific. This is yet another massive coup for the APL.
It is, and from what I understand, Entain is, quite keen to put a bit of resources into the local market here, which is great. It's great for our market, and I think that's what we're seeing here with some structural changes. As you say, Joel Williams has stepped up to a higher role as well, so they've brought Tom on. So I think that's great, Gunter. The APL is certainly doing some very good things in the country, and it's great to see a bit of money come in to support the game in that way. So I'm really looking forward to what APL does over the coming 6-12 months, 2 years.
When APL first came up to the Gold Coast to Sharks and ran their first little series, I had a great chat to Joel and I said, look, this has definitely got potential. And then last year, their APL Millions was absolutely massive. And I said, mate, you could run this, it's going to outgrow the room at Southport Sharks. I said, you could run this in the Gold Coast Convention Centre and have it like a mini World Series. Like, it was unbelievable how big that series is, and it's going to be bigger again this year. I think poker is definitely still rising in Australia, and after Adrian Attenborough came second in the main event, that gave us a huge boost as well. And the good thing is, and like, I miss Aussie Millions, I miss going to Crown, walking into the poker room, the smell, everything about it. The Aussie Millions is just a thing you look forward to besides World Series every year. All of these things pushing poker and booming it up in 3 or 4 or 5 years' time, when Crown do have their license back and they see how well everywhere else is doing, and the way it's going at the moment, it's going to be huge by then. Surely that's enough of a push for them to say, all right, we're going to bring Aussie Millions back, because we're missing out on some of the pie. Another draw card for Aussie Millions is the APL in Melbourne a couple of months ago. The Jack Star got 400 runners or something, smashed a record. Like, that was just one event. Like, Melbourne has a huge player base like Sydney. So yeah, things are definitely looking good for us.
It's interesting because Ben, you and I have been discussing this as of late as well. We do know that poker has had such great success over these last 3 years or so, and especially after the pandemic restrictions have been lifted and everyone started traveling again, and people were able to get out and socialize and play together and enjoy each other's company. But in reality, we know that money is a finite resource. I think we are starting to see a similar pattern to what transpired after the first great Australian poker boom in the early 2000s. And I think we're sort of on the precipice, as it were, that tipping point between a further rise or a plateau in the numbers and the attendance throughout poker events. Have your thoughts changed on that somewhat, or are you still of that same opinion?
I think that what's happening now is really not so much that it's plateauing, but I think, after COVID, after we reopened from COVID, every event's numbers went through the roof. Players were just desperate to get out and play anything. Now, that was always going to just plateau a little bit. But But I think really what we're probably seeing at the moment is just trying to figure out exactly what works on the annual calendar. How many events is the right number of events in the right number of locations, how often per year, and just jostling for position a little bit there. So I think that's the main thing we're seeing at the moment. But I don't think the demand is necessarily any lower. And I'd probably extend that outside of Australia too. I know you and I, Land, have been following the exploits of some of the Aussies that are traveling through Asia at the moment. Bert Perry, Josh McCulley, Brendan Ruby was over there recently, quite a strong contingent. And the Asian Poker Tour Taiwan event just broke all records for APT events in Asia very recently under its new management. So, I think Asia is going through what we went through perhaps 12 months earlier. But I think that's what's happening. I think that it's just a matter of getting the calendar right, making sure there's not too many events cramming into one another. And the demand is absolutely there. And I've got no doubt the demand is still there right now.
I think it's safe to say we are starting to see things sort of smooth out in terms of planning and scheduling for the year ahead, now that we obviously had the luxury of time in this day and age, as opposed to what we saw in the first couple of years or so, where there was a little bit of a logjam, a bit of saturation in certain parts of the market, particularly in New South Wales and Queensland. That is starting to smooth out quite a bit. And we are also seeing, at least at a state level, the ability for major brands to get together and work cohesively to make sure that they're not clashing with each other. And case in point, South Australia, like they still continue to kick goals and break records in terms of number of entries and prize pools. Ricky, I know that you've been keeping a close eye on everything that's happening all around the country. And I should ask you, should we start introducing something like the SA Poker Team to a national level and get these major brands together so we can start really working together to secure the long-term future of the industry?
Yeah, I've had this discussion multiple times with 𝘔𝘏𝘐𝘚, who owns a WPT league up here. And yeah, for a while there, especially last year, it was just like one after the other, after the other. And then there was always one of the series that would suffer from that. And I said to him, you need to have a meeting. Everyone needs to come together at the end of the year and just put out a roadmap for the following year. And then no one's stepping on anyone's toes, and try and get a small gap between the series. And so, there's enough for everyone in the pie, for all the business owners, all the ventures. And that is definitely something that needs to be implemented. But I've noticed that the Star Gold Coast did just drop their, I'm not sure if it was the Gold Coast Champs. There was a series that's supposed to be on about now. It never got announced. So they dropped that because there is so much going on, and then they're just focusing on their WPT Australia. But yeah, it's a very important thing to keep the ecosystem. And also what it does, too many series, it sends the recreational players broke. And that's what we don't want to do, because the recreational players fuel all these series. And they're just people who are working for $1,000, $1,500 a week, and they can't go to 3 series in 1 month. And so, yeah, keep the ecosystem going, and then everything will be fine.
As we've seen there, gents, plenty happening, and plenty more coming our way. And it will certainly be very, very interesting to see how things develop. But, of course, you can keep up with all that's happening on and around the Aussie Veldt by visiting pokermedia.com.au and following us on all our socials: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and Discord. That's all we've got time for. So from all of us here at PMA, Ben Blaschke and Ricky Kroesen, my name is Landon Blackhall. It's been a pleasure having your company, and we'll see you again soon. Bye for now. You win some, you lose more. For free and confidential support, call 1-800-858-858 or visit gamblinghelponline.com.au.